Brilliant, thank you. So thank you, Maciej. Congratulations on the inaugural Blockchain Scotland Edinburgh DeFi Summit. So I'm Matthew. I'm from the Ethereum Foundation, and I think there's a mixture of people here today. A few of us crypto native, some of us coming from traditional finance, and so like Maciej said, I think it's good to bridge that gap. And so I take the opportunity as one of the first talks to kind of give a bit of an introduction, a bit of a foundation, and introduce Ethereum, because some of the talks that we'll hear from later, whether that be DeFi, AI, agentic finance, or otherwise, is almost certainly building on Ethereum. And if not on Ethereum L1, then on an Ethereum L2. And we'll hear from Ian from Linear later, more on L2s, and we can dive into some of the details. But I'll try to set the scene. So first and foremost, let me just explain what the Ethereum Foundation does. Like Maciej said, historically perhaps hasn't been as engaged with enterprise or with institutions, but the Ethereum Foundation is a non-profit. It supports open, decentralized public infrastructure that is Ethereum and is a neutral steward. So really it acts not as a controlling entity, but as a guiding force trying to ensure the long-term success of Ethereum. And so it's a facilitator, not a controller of the platform, and it wants to facilitate the trajectory of the Ethereum development within the community of developers. And like Maciej said, now more and more so in the social layer, engaging with enterprise and with institutions. And so the Ethereum Foundation has two key goals: to maximize the number of people who directly and indirectly use Ethereum in such a way that they benefit from Ethereum's underlying values, and to maximize the resilience of Ethereum's technical and social infrastructure. And so this is what the Ethereum Foundation org chart looks like now. It's a bit small, but you'll see on the left-hand side is the protocol team. This is the collection of researchers and technologists who are responsible for ensuring the resilience of the technical side of the Ethereum ecosystem and coordinating the technical development. And now, like Maciej said, the somewhat newly formed or newly reorganized ecosystem development side. And so I'm one of the small names in the top right under enterprise acceleration, and our goal is to give the support, attention, and also bring attention to the enterprises and institutions building on Ethereum and in the Ethereum ecosystem, including L2s. So what that looks like in the past 4 weeks that the team has been formed is lots and lots of conversations with banks, financial institutions, asset managers, to understand their needs, to understand what they're doing, where we didn't already, and to start to amplify that so that people are aware. And so I don't think that we can fully understand Ethereum without first addressing its values. From like an ideological or fundamental perspective, they are censorship resistance, open source innovation, privacy protection, and security. And all of these have technical considerations. So being an open network where anyone, anywhere can transact and build without barriers. Or when it comes to security, ensuring that the technical roadmap is robust and resilient and focuses on security. But then when we look at this, how does it translate into business, technical, or economic perspectives? Well, censorship resistance means that as an enterprise, you're guaranteed business continuity. If you have an SLA with a cloud provider of 99.9% uptime, that sounds quite good. But Ethereum's been live for 100% of the time since it was launched in 2015. And so these technical values actually translate into business outcomes and success. Just like the open source innovation, you're not locked into one vendor. You can work across L2s. There's diversity within the ecosystem, and there's optionality. And finally, for any enterprise, any financial institution, security is paramount. So the security of the network as the core focus of the technical roadmap is directly translated into secure transactions or operations for enterprise on the blockchain. And so Ethereum isn't just a technology. What does this kind of translate to in outcomes from those values? And so resilience and credible neutrality, like I mentioned, Ethereum has been live uninterrupted for 10 years. 10 years last week since the first block was mined in 2015. And it operates with no single point of failure, no centralized controlling entity, and that means that it's truly open source with no vendor lock-in. And then decentralization and economic security, which go hand in hand. Ethereum secured by over 12,000 nodes with 1.1 million validators worldwide. So again, that really minimizes risks when building on Ethereum. And it also means that with over 130 billion in staked Ethereum securing the network from an economic perspective, it's not only the most secure, but the most difficult and expensive smart contract blockchain to attack. And so all of this translates into serious business outcomes for anyone building, whether it's a decentralized finance app or some of the largest asset managers in the world when it comes to adopting Ethereum. And so we've talked about the values, we've talked about what that looks like technically and what some of the kind of key outcomes. But for us to really realize the values of decentralization and of Ethereum, we think they have to build on a public blockchain. And for the past 10 years, there's been considerations between private blockchains and public blockchains when it comes to enterprise and others adopting blockchain technology. And so I think the analogy between the intranet and internet is a good one when we look at public versus private blockchains, because a private blockchain or an intranet connecting just a few computers is a walled garden, and the value is really capped to a small number of participants. The lack of open source, I think, stifles innovation and stifles connectivity, so you don't have that kind of global liquidity layer that is which is possible on public blockchains. And whenever it's centralized, whenever it's controlled by a single or small number of parties, you lose the benefits of decentralization and the security and resilience that comes with that. And finally, the lack of openness reduces standardization. It's very limited to the number of people that can innovate within a private blockchain. And as we have seen, and as we'll see later from some of the great DeFi apps that are building, the innovation on public blockchains is second to none, and that's why we think that Ethereum as a public blockchain and the Ethereum ecosystem will and is winning over private blockchains, even though, as many people will know, lots of the private blockchains are just private instances of Ethereum. And so we see this, and I think once upon a time we considered, when or if enterprise will build on blockchains. But now it's quite clear. Enterprises are building on blockchains, and this is just a small fraction of the institutions and companies that are building on Ethereum L2s, or building their own Ethereum L2. And so this is a clear signal of that conversion of understanding the benefits and moving, if they were on private blockchains, to public blockchains. And so we have multiple instances. BlackRock, eToro, and Robinhood are now launching tokenized stocks, allowing 24/7 trading. Robinhood announced that it will be launching a layer 2 blockchain, as Sony, Coinbase, and others already have. And so it's very significant adoption, and I think that validates some of the points we've just discussed. And just to dive a little bit deeper into one example, BlackRock, world's largest asset manager, tokenized, an SEC-approved money market fund, benefiting from the efficiencies that come with tokenization, with being on a blockchain, 24/7 access to liquidity and trading, and lots of cost reduction. And so this isn't a radical decentralized finance application like many of the others that we might learn about later or that you'll be familiar with. This is a very familiar, structured TradFi product that is just leveraging tokenization and blockchain rails to really derive benefits for businesses and for users. And if we just look at some of the stats here, of course, it's clear that there's significant adoption, particularly in the past year or half a year since 2025, going from a little over maybe half a billion to approaching 3 billion in total value locked within this fund. And not only that, but we can see that Ethereum dominates the total value locked when it comes to the BlackRock Biddle Fund, and as we'll see in a moment, it tends to do that with most other tokenized assets. And so just in the bottom left-hand corner, we see as well where Ethereum isn't dominating TVL, Ethereum layer 2s, such as Polygon, Arbitrum, and Optimism, are also really key in enabling the adoption of blockchains for enterprise. And so we've seen that example, and that is one demonstration of why Ethereum is the backbone of the on-chain economy. But we see that throughout essentially all of the stats, whether it's the RWA, real-world asset, market share, the TVL, total value locked of stablecoins across chains, where 60% is on Ethereum, DeFi TVL, and whether it's DEX volume, transfers, the liquidity on Ethereum is significantly greater than its competitors. And so we see that where Ethereum is almost 10 times the TVL in DeFi of the second largest ecosystem. It's got 90% along with its L2s of the on-chain tokenization value. And we can see not only does Ethereum dominate liquidity when it comes to real-world assets, but we can also quite clearly see here just how quickly the amount of real-world assets tokenized on-chain is increasing. And finally, stablecoins, another key pillar of enterprise adoption of blockchain and tokenization, is essentially Ethereum is the home of stablecoins, as stablecoins were developed on Ethereum, and it continues to dominate in the stablecoin statistics. And all of this is really not just facilitated, but underpinned by a really flourishing ecosystem of decentralized applications, be it decentralized marketplaces, tokenization issuers, or stablecoins themselves, almost all of whom were initially created on Ethereum. And so we see the stats, we see the adoption, and more adoption is coming. What's often been a criticism of Ethereum is its ability to scale, whether that be low transactions or high gas costs. And in order to ensure that we are capable of essentially welcoming enterprise to come and build and all others to come and build, bring volume on chain, bring TVL on chain, Ethereum needs to scale as well. And I think that Tom from Swift's quote here is really good, saying essentially Ethereum is the wrong blockchain because it has high gas fees is like saying Amazon shouldn't use the internet because dial-up was slow in 1995. Of course, Ethereum today is very different to Ethereum in 2015, and Ethereum in a few years will be very different to Ethereum today. So enterprises are building on today's Ethereum, not the Ethereum of a few years ago that had high transaction costs, and they're building for tomorrow's Ethereum, which we can talk on a little bit in a moment. And so part of that scaling strategy is layer 2s. And so a little kind of recap or introduction to layer 2s for those not familiar allows secondary blockchains to run far more transactions, far cheaper and far quicker, but still inherit the security of Ethereum as a base layer. So we essentially have a large number of transactions that get bundled together and deposited into an Ethereum block, which means that everyone inherits the security of Ethereum, but can scale. And not only can it scale, but it provides a lot more control, compliance, and customization for enterprises or layer 2s building on Ethereum. And this is just 12 of the largest layer 2s out of 106 layer 2s that are now live on Ethereum. And together, that's securing $1.1 trillion in assets across Ethereum and the layer 2s. We've already seen how Ethereum and the layer 2s dominate in terms of the metrics, but when it's an enterprise looking to build either on Ethereum mainnet, layer 1, on a layer 2, or as many are doing, creating their own layer 2, this gives full control. So control at the layer 2 over security and operational standards, whether that's the transactions per second, how the sequencer is set up to order the transactions, the performance of that blockchain, and much more. And of course, when it comes to financial services, compliance is incredibly important. So whether that's whitelisting wallets that can make certain transactions, whether it's having permissioned access to certain applications, to certain functions, and so you can benefit from the security, the interoperability and composability of Ethereum whilst having the required business logic and compliance to make sure that you can run your operations accordingly. Not only that, but it's quite significant when you, as a layer 2 blockchain, want to inherit the security assumptions of the layer 1 Ethereum, you're no longer paying for security yourself in the same way that alt L1s need to. And so you can save significant amounts of money. It's quite affordable now to run your own layer 2 blockchain, and even to make money from that in the instances of some of the largest, the significant platform revenues that come from the sequencer fees of the layer 2 ordering their transactions. And so we already see leading businesses choosing Ethereum as an L2, whether that's Robinhood, who recently announced, Ant Group, the parent group of Alibaba, and Alipay is launching Jove, a layer 2. OKX, Kraken, and Coinbase, centralized exchanges, have their own layer 2s, and we've seen incredible success when it comes to Coinbase and Base. And then even outside of financial services, looking towards IP or media, Sony with Sonium launched their layer 2, and exactly for the reasons that we've covered there, because they have the customizability and options of inheriting Ethereum security. And it's not just the layer 2 roadmap that is scaling Ethereum and its ecosystem, but Ethereum has its own layer 1 roadmap, which considers both the layer 1 and the layer 2. So later this year, the data capacity of both the layer 1 through an increase in the gas limit, and of layer 2 through an increase in the number of blobs, which is a special data type for those layer 2s, bundling those transactions and depositing on the layer 1, reducing latency by shortening block times, increasing the transactions per second both on the layer 1 and through the layer 2s by using zero-knowledge proofs at the EVM level to make it far more efficient and increase throughput. And then important things like simplifying the infrastructure, reducing technical debt and complexity, just because that, one, makes everything easier to understand and build on, but two, reduces the risks and attack vectors. And finally, we can't forget, whether it's in a few years, 10 years or 50 years, quantum resistance is becoming more and more important within blockchains, as quantum computers potentially or will have the ability to break the cryptography that is used in most blockchains at the moment. Ethereum already has processes in place should this happen relatively soon, but as you can see on the roadmap, it's very much front of mind to post-quantum Ethereum and ensure that it can continue to be resilient for hundreds of years. And so we understand Ethereum's values, how they translate into technical outcomes, why those technical outcomes have resulted in the metrics, TVL, and adoption that we see in some of those charts. And I just want to come back to why an enterprise would choose to build on Ethereum, an Ethereum layer 2, or create their own layer 2. And that's because when you're an enterprise, a financial institution working with millions, billions, or trillions of dollars of value, you want to know that the blockchain that you're building on isn't controlled by a centralized party, is borderless, and is resilient. And so the question you ask is, well, who can turn off the blockchain that I'm building on? And the answer with many blockchains is somewhat ambiguous, but with Ethereum, the answer is no one. And that's because Ethereum leads where it really matters. Like we said, with resilience and stability, with the 10 years of consistent uptime, the credible neutrality, which translates to essentially no counterparty risk for enterprise, the flexibility and customization of building an L2, the liquidity layer, because liquidity begets liquidity, and Ethereum is already leading in that domain. And so for efficiency, for low slippage, etc., they'll continue to bring their assets and transact on Ethereum. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, is the decentralization. The decentralization has often come at a cost, because you, with the scalability trilemma, if you prioritize decentralization and security at the same time, throughput can suffer. But with the layer 2 roadmap and the ZK roadmap, this is starting to improve. And that decentralization is what gives Ethereum its resilience and censorship resistance. And so I just wanted to end with this image, which I think shows the global scale and decentralization of Ethereum, where each of these dots represents a node, and each of those 12,000 nodes has over 1.1 million validators who are securing the network in a global way. And of course, I hope, and we hope, to continue to see the number of these dots increase and to be more distributed globally. But I think this summarizes nicely how the values translate to technical outcomes, and it's because of this global community of Ethereum node providers. So I don't think the question is any longer if enterprise will build on Ethereum and on blockchains, but when and how you'll leverage this technology to create real business outcomes for the business and for your customers. We have a Q&A coming up after this, so I'd be happy to discuss any of your questions at that Q&A throughout the day. It's been a pleasure presenting on Ethereum, and I look forward to all of the talks coming up later. Thank you.